Hello and welcome to the Sohbet Punx Podcast. This is episode 74. This is the podcast about meaning, transcendence, awe, and spirituality with a small s. My name is Dave.
My name is Siobhan.
And we are the Sohbet Punx.
Hope you're all fine and dandy. It's been a funky couple of weeks, I think, in the wider world.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really going to go there, but I'm just saying.
Not interesting.
It's been a funny little couple of weeks. If you're in Britain, the weather's gotten nice and cold. We have properly got winter, and it's my favourite kind of weather right now, so that's nice. If you're in America, you now have a crappy president, but that's that. I guess no. Did anyone think that wasn't going to happen? I guess I hoped that it wouldn't, but it's happened.
I don't want to talk about this.
But no, so I don't know why I brought that up.
No,
specifically when all you've done in the last few weeks, you've been like, let's get rid of politics, and it's the first thing I've gone in with. But I think our weather, let's go back to our weather. Well,
let's talk about the weather.
No!
I'd like to apologise for the fact that I sound a bit like Marianne Faithfull.
I don't know what Marianne Faithfull sounds like.
Well,
but if it's like you...
Exactly like this.
Wow.
Me with a croaky voice.
I don't need to go there then. Don't need to listen to her.
Not an illness, if you were worried. Just too much singing.
Too much singing. Well, you've been busy with the gigs.
Hence the singing. I wasn't just singing in the shower.
You could have been singing in the shower. Everywhere you go.
I think if you sang in the shower to the extent that you lost your voice, you probably would be kicked out of wherever you were living.
Yeah, you'd be very annoying to your neighbours, for sure, I'd say.
Very annoying.
But full of joy, as long as you were... Oh, well, I don't know. It depends what you were singing. If you were scream crying some sad songs, then I wouldn't be that happy.
You're making a reference there to the band Evergrey, who I've just been listening to.
I absolutely was not.
I know, maybe subconsciously you were getting a dig in. I don't know. But I've been listening to sort of this... I don't know how to describe Evergrey, really. I think we've talked about them before. It's definitely... It's Euro metal pap with a very overly emotional, somewhat older man, who I assume is very successful in Sweden. I think they're Swedish.
They're Swedish, yeah.
I assume that they're one of these bands that probably has hit songs in their homeland, but out of context. He's the front, not the front cover of the album, but I was just looking at the back cover of the album. I'm definitely going to be body shaming this man, and I apologise. I don't mean to, but it's just an unlikely choice that they've made. It's the five of them sort of covered in mud. Almost looks like, I think they've ripped it off from. There's a Tool video for Stinkfist. I think it's for Stinkfist, where somebody looks. It's almost like. Yeah, I think it is just covered in mud, but it almost looks like scales. It's like really dried mud. Yeah. And they're just naked from the waist up. And they might be naked from the waist down. You can't see because it cuts it off. But it's something that a very young, buff person would look pretty shit if they did that. But they could probably just about pull it off. But this, I'm guessing, late 50s.
Late 50s? I wouldn't say they're that
hope I'm not.
old.
Or maybe I'm age shaming you as well. Maybe he's like 35 and I'm just being a cunt.
Yeah, I reckon like late 40s to early 50s max.
Anyway, he's a very emotional man.
He is. He dyes his little goatee.
Yeah,
black,
that's what makes me think he's really dyed his hair. I mean, he's really got that kind of extraordinarily dyed hair.
I think there's something in European metal where it's just so in its own little bubble. That might be very normal. That might be completely, and I feel like it is. When we went to Wacken, I'm fairly sure we saw lots of like weird and wonderful,
it's
a
beautiful thing.
Dyed goatees.
Yeah, and a lot of fat older men as well. And I love it. It's brilliant.
It's a brilliant thing.
It's definitely a place to go if you're. But I still just.
Dried mud was a weird choice.
Well, no, I suppose it's just that he's definitely the person who's in control of his band. So he's definitely the one who's decided. They're playing in London soon, and it's the picture on the flyer or the poster for it as well. So he's obviously decided, like,
that's the one.
What I want to do on this album is I just want to sort of strip off from the waist up
and
in
mud,
get
guys.
Covered in mud. It will look really good. And
doesn't.
I just wonder what. Well, no, I don't know. Maybe I don't know. The Swedish probably have a much healthier view of bodies than I do. I was going to say we do, but I can't blame this on anyone else.
True.
This awful body shaming that I'm doing.
Well, I now think that the next Haest album, you can sack off that lovely artist you get that draws all your front covers, and just, or at least on the inner sleeve, just be you lot caked in mud.
Well, we're all on the gut health train, so I was going to say we look great, but we don't.
Yeah, but your whole point is this guy doesn't look great, so fucking join him.
Yeah, no, that's
and
true.
You
Sorry, I'm gonna. Yeah, I feel like I've said this in a negative way because I did, but I don't mean it in a negative way.
Yeah.
I think it's great that he's just said,
fuck it.
Fuck it. I'll get my flabby man breasts out and just.
I'm in my late 40s, early 50s, or according to David, I'm 75 years old.
I said late 50s.
He's literally a great grandparent. No, he's not.
Anyway, point is,
pap-metal in the shower would ruin your voice.
But also Evergrey, very good band.
Okay.
Don't quote me on that when you listen to them and think, what the fuck?
What happened to David?
What did happen to No, only kidding. That's not the subject of this episode. But maybe it is, actually, in a funny sort of way. So we like to start off this podcast by telling you, the listener, about something that we have done in the last couple of weeks since the last episode that has brought a sense of meaning, transcendence, or spirituality with a small s into our lives. Siobhan, I would like you to start, as always.
Well, I think I haven't done a wildly good job.
Oh, that's good.
I would say. Yeah, no, it is bad. It is bad. But one thing that I have done is I went for a lovely walk with my friend Annie in the woods. You're
not going to now have another religious experience in the woods, are you?
No religious
We're not
experience.
using this whole episode up on you finding God again.
Oh my God, it happened again. No, nothing wildly spiritual happened. But I've mentioned it a few times before, since it being pointed out on a few podcasts about us as adults in the modern world not being very connected, and definitely not being very connected to our friends. Women are much better at it than men generally on the whole. But I would say that I've gotten worse. I don't know if that's telling of the times or if that's telling of, I don't know what. I think it's a big conundrum of thing.
Age has a big thing to
age,
do with it.
Being this age at this time. I don't know. There's lots of different things, but I think everyone feels a little unconnected at times. And I realised that Annie's one of my good friends that I play in a band with, but outside of that band and outside of going to gigs, we've actually not hung out all that often. We go to the same gym, so we do actually get to do classes together sometimes. But anyway, we just randomly decided to go for a nice walk in the woods and just had a really nice long chat, which, like I say, you don't realise you don't do as often until you do it. And then you're like, this is just the most normal thing in the world. And I say normal in inverted commas because you think going for a walk with your friend in the woods, having a chat is normal. And I would say that it was, but it's not something I do all the time. So therefore it's not normal for me. And I wish it was. So the only way you wish it is to do it. And it was really nice. And then since then, I've connected with a few more people, made some plans to meet up before Christmas for various people. And so whilst they're not like transcendence or in spirituality, meaning. I'm going with it for me.
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, I think friendship is very much something that creates meaning.
Yeah.
Yeah. Probably. Well, no. I think you, and then also that you can share transcendence or awe, or to some extent. And what is spirituality? I mean, it's a phrase which is sort of thrown away, but it's a metaphor for something, isn't it? Like all words, it's a metaphor for something, and so you could probably. You could probably include all of them if you'd like.
Yeah, well...
A lot to put on Annie's shoulders, but it's
probably
I know.
True. She wouldn't have known that when we were just chatting about meandering around in the woods and all the other things we were chatting about.
I think while you were doing that, I was with her husband in a nuclear bunker. so
having a very similar experience, I'm sure.
A very similar experience.
Such the same.
Yeah, that's the most sort of gender normative we've probably ever been. Yeah,
it's true.
I hope you were talking about boys.
Oh my God. How's the husband? Ugh. No, it wasn't quite like that. But it was really nice to just...
Certainly Wolf was in a couple of ladies.
What, in the nuclear bunker?
There was not a lady
in the desolate area of Essex.
In the nuclear bunker,
yeah. But it was just really nice. Like I say, it's one of those like normal things that isn't particularly normal for me at the moment. Not specifically me. I just think, you know, I go to work, we hang out a lot, but I don't go and hang out with like my friends a lot. And I think actually sometimes trying to take stock of who your friends actually are, because I go to the gym an awful lot, so there's tons of people I see all the time.
But you don't like them.
No, it's not that I don't like them at all. No. I like all of them, but like when I have to when I consider like who are actually my friends, you do you can kind of mosey along thinking you're friends with a lot of people that actually, if you hung out with them more, you possibly aren't actually friends with them. And how many people would you contact if you needed stuff? Or how many people do you check on regularly? But I've just thought a bit more about who mine actually are and trying to make a bit more of a deliberate contact.
Well, I wonder who didn't make the list.
No, that sounds awful. But I think as adults, we don't have that many close friends. But those who we do have, we probably should make some efforts with. And I can feel that I don't make that many efforts.
Well, we're literally in the middle of a loneliness epidemic, apparently.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, maintaining those friendships is literally the opposite of the problem which most people are facing in the modern world.
100%.
Right?
I mean, I watched Andrew Huberman talk on a few podcasts, and he said the same thing quite a few times, and I think you've seen the same thing. And he said there's loads of things you can do, because one simple thing you can do is just literally send a text to someone every morning, he says, but regularly, which is just saying, hi, how are you? Or good morning, hope you're well. And he said it's the equivalent of saying hello to someone in the street, which we don't do. And a lot of people aren't like getting out of their houses, a lot with working at home and like you say, the loneliness thing.
Well, most people aren't saying hello to the people that they have to deal with in shops.
True, just looking down at their phone.
With some knowledge.
And he said that it doesn't really work necessarily with text, but he said a follow-on from that is our brains even, and something about our senses, we are made to recognize human faces, and when you see a human face, there's something like dopaminergic goes on in your brain because you're happy to see other people. And it happens in other animals. So like when a dog sees a dog, they have the same thing.
Oh, we saw some dogs meeting each other this morning. There was a lot of dopamine going around there.
They were so excited. But yeah, so humans do have, even though we don't feel it, potentially, we have the same thing.
Well, no, hold on, just 1 second. We do feel it. The thing is, it's just so microscopic that we don't know that we're feeling it.
Yeah, true.
So this is the thing. We've talked about dopamine so much, but I think it's important to say, it's tiny increments and it's a slow build, but that's literally what makes you happy.
Yeah.
But you don't notice. You would have no idea that it's happened on each singular occasion. But it is what creates a sense of happiness within you eventually.
I think there was one time when we noticed, and it was lockdown, and then when you got back out there, there was a feeling. Yeah, I liked seeing other people's faces.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there was also a lot of fear, though, so therefore that might have... who knows, because you're not in anyone else's head. And
true.
Obviously in lockdown, we have a vague idea of what each other went through. But even then, I don't really... I don't think that we really know. You don't really know what's going on with other people. So I think there's probably a lot of people that didn't feel that way.
True. What about you, David? What have you done in the last 2 weeks that has brought you meaning, transcendence, or spirituality with a little or a massive S?
Well, this is a bit... I'm not sure that it brought me any of those things directly. It's quite similar.
Well, then you've not done it.
It's ended up possibly helping with those things. But it's something that I feel like I would say, I would give this advice to other people, and I realised that I wasn't necessarily taking it myself, and I've done a few experiments in this. I am someone who I think fundamentally gets very bothered by small things, and certainly and we've talked about this on the podcast before, certainly like rudeness and other people not sort of appreciating others really bothers me. And I've probably on the podcast, but certainly generally speaking, I think it creates a sense in me of sort of annoyance at the human race in general and just annoyance at the world. And I think that is probably to some extent me falling into a somewhat stereotypical middle-aged man sort of a mindset. Although I have to admit, I think I've probably always felt that way, and I also don't think I really know anybody else who hasn't got a bit of that mindset in them as well. And so we've talked again, if you walk down the street and you see something horrible, then you sort of think to yourself, oh my god, the world's like the worst place. Whereas if you walk down the street and see a bunch of dogs meeting each other and loads of dopamine going through their brains, then you might come back and think, oh, isn't the world wonderful? And it is all about really, really tiny things. Anyway, I realise that there's a couple of things that have that really bother me, and they're things that I've brought up on the podcast before, and probably talked to you about ad nauseum.
Mm-hmm.
One of them is people walking down the street looking at their mobile phones and not realising that I am there, and often walking directly at me, and me having to sort of skirt round them, which I think overall I find very annoying, because I think it's kind of an indictment on the modern world, because it says something about individualism, it says something about not caring about anybody around you, and it says something about being completely addicted to looking at your phone, whatever the fuck is on there. So that's one. And then in a very, very similar way at work, so it was more or less what I just sort of brought up, I work in a sort of front-facing customer service role fundamentally, and people who are just actively rude to me when they're buying a book or whatever they're buying, and often that has something to do with the phone as well. And if you've listened to this podcast, you'll probably realise that I have a bit of a beef with phones, social media generally, and also I think having fairly recently more or less not given them up, but I don't take my phone out with me anymore, for example. So I suppose I'm just in a completely different place to where those people are. But that's not really important. But I suppose it does change my attitude towards others. And, people coming to me, throwing whatever they're going to, sometimes literally throwing whatever they're going to buy down, sometimes in the middle of a conversation on their phone, not acknowledging me, not making eye contact, not saying hello, and then just holding their phone up until it beeps, basically, and then walking out. Those two things were really winding me up. Now, there was one other thing that a while ago was winding me up, which was that, this is totally a narrative that I've made up. So just to be clear, I don't think there's any truth in this necessarily, but I feel like since probably lockdown, but at some point in the very recent times, I've noticed that when I try to cross, this is so minor, but it's kind of important to my story. When I try and cross a pedestrian crossing, an incredible amount of people just don't bother stopping anymore. And I feel like the entirety of my life, if you walk to a pedestrian crossing, the cars stop, and that's just how it works. And you could pretty much, and this is why I think I'm somewhat right in this context, because I didn't even used to think about it. If I got to a pedestrian crossing, I pretty much used to just walk across the road and expect the cars to stop. And I've noticed that, and this is a narrative that I'm telling, and it might be that I've just started noticing this, and it's always been like this. Who knows? It's not really important. But the point is the amount of people that just keep driving, and they always do the worst thing that they do is they give you a little wave, as if to say, "Oh, sorry." And for some reason, that really stuck in my craw. And again, I think all of these things share one thing in common, and that is that they suggest a certain level of individualism. They suggest a certain level of selfishness. They suggest a certain level of putting oneself before anybody else. And two of them obviously have something to do with mobile phones, which is something I've got a beef with. Anyway, the pedestrian crossing one, a little while ago, not that long ago, maybe a couple of months ago, I just thought, and it really annoyed me. I mean, to the point where I got quite angry. And you know when you have that, I should have fucking kicked the back of that car sort of feeling. Like, genuinely, I never would, but I'm just saying, I'm just being honest. I'm just being honest. I doubt,
David the car kicker. Sorry.
It created a sense of rage in me that I don't experience anymore. I used to experience a lot, and I don't experience anymore. But for some reason, that thing, or all three of these things, on different levels. But the one with the pedestrian crossing, really, I don't know what it was. It's probably a similar thing to like road rage. There's something about cars and the road that bring out a different version. So even if you're not in the car, I think that there's something about that situation which brings out a completely different. In me, it's a very ugly, somewhat animalistic, completely uncontrolled. I don't do it consciously whatsoever, but it brings out the worst version of me that I do not want to be and I never want to be. A bit like alcohol, which is why I've stopped drinking. So And I thought to myself, well, what can I do about this? And so all I did a few months ago was I decided, well, from now on, I'm just going to pretty much, I suppose I'm going to use clumsy words to describe it, pretty much just pretend that pedestrian crossings aren't guaranteed. Mm-hmm. So if somebody stops for me, they're doing me a favour. And in a way, that's sort of true.
Yeah.
Obviously, the law says one thing, but in a way, what is the law very important? And I just thought to myself, I'm going to treat every pedestrian crossing a bit like, when you have little islands in the middle of busy roads, and you wait at that island, and then you cross the road when there's no cars coming. And if somebody slows down and waves you across, you think, oh, that was a nice person.
Yeah.
I just thought, I'm just going to treat every pedestrian crossing like this from this point forward. And it was revelatory because... Well, it wasn't really revelatory because it's not like this was happening every day, but it just meant that it changed the context with which I treated pedestrian crossings, and it removed any opportunity for me to feel one way or the other about drivers.
It's also managing your happiness by managing your own expectations, isn't it? That's exactly
100%. It's just stoicism. Totally.
But you've applied it to the Green Cross Code or whatever the road code is called now.
Yeah. But anyways, this worked, I felt. And again, this is all a narrative that I've told myself. Mm-hmm. So it might, you could probably argue, oh, come on, Dave, a couple of times someone didn't let you cross a pedestrian crossing. You created this narrative of like, well, everyone's changed. We've moved into the 2020s and now everyone's an arsehole. And then since you've decided to do this, well, now everyone's just treating pedestrian crossings as they should, and you're just being allowed to cross all the time. And now you think, oh, I've solved this. And that might be true. But in a way, it doesn't matter if that's true. Because it's made my life... It's just removed the stress from my life entirely. It's like the stress that I used to feel is now just not there anymore. It's not... I don't have the opportunity to get that way because I view the thing in a completely different way.
I do think that it is just a lesson in expectations and stoicism. I think it's brilliant. You could apply that to everything.
Well, yeah. So that's where I'm getting to. So therefore, I thought, well, this worked with pedestrian crossing, so I'm going to try this for people's phones. And I've just decided to not care if people are on their phones or not. And it's hard sometimes because I can't help but some people really are like dramatically selfish. Mm-hmm. And obviously, again, working in customer service, and we just started the kind of the build up to Christmas thing. So the shop's getting busier. And a lot of people that don't read books are starting to come to bookshops, which is obviously great and fine. I don't say that in a kind of derogatory way, but it's become very much just a customer service job. Whereas before it's lovely working in a bookshop fundamentally. There is obviously an element of just putting shit through the till, but you're also generally dealing with people that are interested in books and want your opinion and what have you. So it's a lovely job. But at this time of year, it gets slightly not so lovely. And I just thought, from now, I'm not going to expect anybody to say hello to me. I'm not going to expect anybody to do anything apart from hold their phone out. And you would sort of think it's not as easy. I thought it's not as easy as that. I can't just get rid of being annoyed with people about this thing, which I think I actually have a right to be annoyed about. But I think that's the thing. If you remove the I have a right to be annoyed about this aspect to almost anything, it just changes the context with which you see it in, and it's just made my life infinitely better. But, particularly the work thing, because that is something that was happening literally 20 times an hour, and every single one I was getting a bit annoyed. Not really. I mean, it's a slightly different, again, not annoyed, not road rage annoyed. I mean, it wasn't like that. But I do, and we say it all the time. We have this thing where whenever we're walking around together, there is always people who are looking at their phones and not looking up, and they always seem to walk. It's like gnats. Right. Mm-hmm. When we're walking through the woods, gnats really like to bite me, and they don't ever bite you.
They really like
and I feel like that's the same with people that just look at their phones while they walk. They always seem to walk at me. They never walk at you. And I'm sure that's just my narrative, but I think you've picked up on it as well. And so we have this thing where you always say to me, oh, look, you still don't exist.
Yeah.
And I think I started it. I said, oh, look, I don't think I exist anymore because these people are just I don't seem to be here. But I've just got rid of that. I'm just sort of like, well, yeah, fuck it then. I don't exist. I mean, maybe we're going to get into Buddhism in a minute. So I suppose, and I didn't mean it in that context, but sort of removing the importance of me being seen by other people entirely, because actually it has no effect on my life.
No.
Actually, it makes no difference if someone walks at me with a phone, because I'm never going to be looking at a phone, so I'm at least looking forward and I can get out of their way.
Yeah.
And so if you just treat them like, like they're a blind person, for example, you wouldn't get annoyed with a blind person because they walked at you. That entire context. I mean, it would be completely outrageous if you got annoyed with a blind person for walking at you.
And for that moment, for all intents and purposes, they are.
They literally
they're blinded
are.
by their, current what they're looking at on their phone and that addiction to doing it. And also, the one thing that because I completely think I understand that feeling that you're going through, and I think road rage is the best. That used to be my one place where I used to test myself with can I challenge my feelings about everything all of a sudden in the minute of road rage. And there's two sides to what you're doing. It's that lowering your expectations and changing your narrative. And there's also, you don't know that person that's staring at their phone, it's our assumption that they don't give a shit and they're being selfish and they're meandering around. And it's probably right, but it's still an assumption. And that could be the 1 in 10 person that's looking at their phone like, oh shit, they just got a really horrendous message and they're looking at it. And then when they nearly bump into you, because you've passed them, you don't know that they're not now thinking in their head, oh god, I nearly walked into that person, that was awful.
Yeah. Or look at that prick who wasn't looking at his phone and didn't bother getting out of my way. Yeah,
exactly. And the assumption that we make is probably right, but even saying probably right is still an assumption. We can never know. And that's how I feel with road rage. I'm always just like, oh my god, this person, why are they doing 20 and a 40 or a 50? That might be their first day in that car. That might be their first day ever driving. They might be an old person that really should be getting off the road, but they can't quite do it yet. There's just so many things you don't know. And we know that because we've had those moments where we might be unsure doing something or carefully driving somewhere because you've got some cargo on the side that can't fall into the footwell. I don't know, but the point is we never know what someone else is going through or happening, and it's our assumptions that then, like you said, they prime us to see it all the time. So you used to get really annoyed by the people on their phones, and then you'd mentally, subconsciously maybe, but you'd be preparing yourself for the next person to pay on their phone and not look at you. And then when you were right, you'd be like, oh, it justifies your opinion of everyone being crap.
Yeah.
If you then remove that narrative, it's probably happening a bit less as well.
Well, also the thing is that let's say the 10th person that does it gets the wrath of the 9 before.
Yeah. 100%.
So what's happened there is that one person has done one thing, which isn't really that outrageous. Yeah. But if you've had a whole day of people doing that to you, and you maybe you've woken up on the wrong side of the bed, and maybe you feel a little bit like these people just see me as a fucking slave or something. Like they don't see me as a person. They're just coming. If you've put all of that baggage on it, like you say, and so by 5 o'clock, you might have had 100 people do that to you. Well, that 100th person who does it isn't just getting their due deserts, or within your brain. Of course, again, I've never would never act on this in any sort of way, but you've sort of dressed that up, But also, there's something that you mentioned was the idea of testing yourself whether in the moment of road rage you can take control of your feelings. That's an interesting idea. I don't know if it's possible, but the point of this sort of thing is that you change the narrative in the first instance, so you never get to the point where you need to change your. So if every time you get in your car you just think, oh fuck it, this is going to take as long as it's going to take. Yeah. I'm probably going to be stuck in traffic for most of it. Oh well, I've got a nice album to listen to, or I'm with someone else. We can just have a chat. Yeah. Then you've removed the possibility of you getting to even the first stage of feeling like this person's not driving fast enough, Whereas if you don't think of any of that in the first instance, by the time the person's not driving fast enough, you've had the 100 people before them who have slowly but surely, and they're getting the whole caboose of your entire journey, not just of what they happen to be doing, which probably isn't really that bad.
Stoicism 101, that one.
Yeah, but I think I read a lot about Stoicism, and I like I say, I would give people advice, and I'm sure we've probably talked about on this podcast about Stoicism and what you can do in that context. But I'm not really sure I've ever seen it actually work in myself. I've tried things, and some of them have been quite fun for a little while, or good for a little while, or they've improved things for a little while. But then something will happen, and it will just be like, no, fuck it, everyone's an arsehole, But
I think that's
and I'm not saying that's not gonna.
I'm
not gonna say that. Yeah. And actually, it's a very stoic attitude to accept and say, well, sometimes I'm gonna feel that way, but it doesn't mean
Yeah.
So that's fine. But I just feel like this is really, I haven't been doing it for that long, but I just, it feels like a massive weight off my shoulder.
Yeah.
It's like a lot of the stuff that we do. When you actually realise that it works, it makes it so much easier to continue it.
Yeah, that's true.
So I genuinely think doing those things has actually made my life considerably better. And I suppose in that context, it's made me have a slightly nicer attitude towards other humans, I think. And I think that probably is what meaning is. And, it goes back to your one. I'm probably more open to having, it doesn't necessarily have a saying on how I am with my friends, because that's completely different. But it probably has some sort of effect on how I am with strangers. And what you said, when I'm at work, for example, if I'm not going at people with this attitude of like, you think I'm a bit of shit and you're not even going to say hello to me, you're just nice to them anyway.
Yeah.
Which I am anyway, and I was anyway, but I was doing it through gritted teeth maybe a little bit before.
Well, it removes the us and them thing. Like, you're already making an opinion about people like who do that. So you're just like, especially your feelings about phones and social media and stuff. So if someone comes up to you and tries to pay like that, you're already thinking selfish. You're already thinking
there's always
self-involved.
A weight.
And that person
can't do anything without your phone.
Yeah, and so that person could say anything, and it would have to be quite a bar before you're going to have any connection to that person. Whereas if you remove that barrier, it's an open book, and you'd be more connected to that person. I don't know.
And ultimately, and this is the most stoic thing, the only person that any of those things, like how I was before or how I am after doing those things, the only person that affects is me, unless I actually kick the person's car.
David the car killer of Haest,
which I would, maybe when I was a bit younger, but I don't think I'm not. I think I'm probably calm enough to maintain that. But it's only. It's only. But you see, you say you hope so, and of course you do hope so, and I hope so too. But the reality is that whilst that might make me sound like a complete prick to say, like, sometimes I get these flashing ideas through my head of like, lashing out at something. The reality is that's what road rage is. I mean, grown fucking adults all the time, every day, are doing that.
Yeah,
sort of
exactly.
thing, all the time, and they maybe not physically, depends, but certainly orally, and there's we've the amount of people that I've seen sort of screaming at cars when they drive past because they haven't done what the person wants to do or whatever, or just think about any car trip you've almost ever been on with anybody. They're all screaming at each other. Everyone's screaming at each other. So it's not that unusual of a thing.
Oh no, of course it's not unusual.
That kind of urge to kick a car that hasn't even crossed the road isn't quite as outrageous as you're saying. But there's something you said that, and I think we've picked up on it before, and I just think it's something that I probably end up saying on a weekly basis, at least, especially at work. That feeling of not that feeling, but that fact that all these opinions that we have and all these ways we treat other people, the only way our opinions and our preconceptions of other people the only person it affects is yourself. Yeah. And I say it to people at work, and I've realised it a lot for myself, that, there's certain people that you can't change, and there's certain people that are going to, I don't know, not work as hard as you'd want, or not work in the same way you'd want, and you might get annoyed by that, but they're not annoyed. They don't even know what's going on. The only person you're pissing off is yourself. And if you are always wondering why that person doesn't change and why that person doesn't do something better or in your way, again, just let it go. Let it go, because the second you let it go, you're just going to be happier. Lower your expectations. That person brings... And also, you don't see the good when you're only seeing the bad.
So like I was saying, like if you only see these people who are paying in that way, or staring at the phone or walking at you, you know, you just think that person's annoying. But A, you don't know that person, but B, there's going to be loads of other good things about that person. And I have this with, like, I have to test myself with colleagues and definitely my manager and things like that. I'm just like, actually, if I only see the one thing that's annoying me, and me is the only one who's getting annoyed, remove that. I'm not annoyed, and you see the good in people.
And I think to some extent there's sort of a delusion about it, and I think it's a completely subconscious delusion, but it's sort of somehow this idea that, I don't think anyone would ever word it this way, but it's almost like we're getting one over on them. But in fact, we're doing completely the opposite.
Yeah.
So if every time someone's walked into me because they're looking at their phone, and I've thought, what an arsehole, there's almost some sort of feeling in me, and it's completely subconscious, of sort of being like, well, you know, I told him.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I don't ever think that clearly, and I know that's not what's happened, but I think there's kind of an underlying impression that maybe you need. It's like, when you get in, you've got to tell someone about that.
It's injustice.
Because someone was
I have to talk about
I've got to tell them. But actually, in reality, it's a little bit like calling a racist an idiot, thinking that that's going to make them no longer a racist. Well, it just isn't. It's going to, in fact, if everybody that almost walked into me because they were looking at their phone, I called an idiot, they're going to think, who is that fucking arsehole? Why did he just call me an idiot?
Yeah, exactly.
And it's definitely one thing it's definitely not going to do either, whether I have it in my own head or whether I say it out loud. One thing it's definitely not going to do is stop them from continuing to walk down the road looking at their phone.
Exactly.
They're
probably going to get their phone out and message someone saying, fuck's sake, this guy just stopped me and called me an idiot. Not just a person,
probably everyone, and post it on social media and then
film, oh my God, David the car kicker's walking down the road calling everyone an idiot. Exactly. Put it on the Instagrams.
He's infamous.
Well, we're going to move on now to the main subject that we were going to discuss in this podcast. And it's something that we've dilly-dallied about discussing, really, because it's weird when you do a podcast, you're trying to make it interesting or talk about general stuff and not try and make it too egotistical and about yourself.
Despite the fact that clearly recording yourself talk for an hour and a half every 2 weeks is probably about as egotistical as it gets.
Exactly. There's already an irony in the even wanting to not do that. And the point of our podcast is for us to have these discussions about things that bring us meaning, and definitely the spirituality was a big, something we were exploring in our lives that we wanted to kind of put into some sort of structured conversation, because we should all be talking about the ways in which we are spiritual and connect with others and connect with the world and connect with ourselves. And so we're going to talk about something that we've been doing for a little while now, and basically discuss our experiences of it. And it's a Buddhist group that we've started attending in St Leonard's in Hastings, in our little local area.
Yeah, I think that it goes back a little bit to something that we talked about on the last episode, which was about Ian McKay's mum recording him as a kid, and how nice it was to go back. And I suppose in a funny sort of way, whilst I don't think we'll ever use it in this way as ourselves, but I think it's probably one way to actually make the podcast somewhat interesting, is that it's sort of a diary of our journey. Maybe, which sounds awful. That's an awful way of describing it. But
I've described it as loads.
There used to be a sort of movement in fanzines of these things called perzines, which were basically personal zines, and it was before social media, so this was very unusual. But now it's literally what we all do constantly. But it was basically someone sort of just writing about themselves and their life and their little thoughts, and it seemed at the time to be extraordinarily egotistical to me, and kind of a bit tacky and shit in a way, but some of them were great, of course. But yeah, like I said, I think that has normalized anyway in society, but also I think that probably if we have any strengths within the podcasting realm, it's not providing you with academic information.
Clearly not.
Because we're not very clever. But whereas we can certainly talk about our own experiences.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways as well, I think doing something like this pushes you to force yourself to have more experiences, so you have something to talk about.
Well, I think that's kind of become the point of this podcast generally. You know, we've been considering the ways in which we'd like to expand our world, expand our understanding of things that bring spirituality and transcendence and all these things. And so I think there is some importance in talking about our experience of having done that and making it not normal, but just...
Yeah, I think normalising it.
But normalising it to some level.
Yeah, particularly within our little scene.
And trying to do it in a way that isn't... I appreciate it's going to sound ridiculous what I'm saying, but in a way that isn't showy. So we're talking about it now, not to be like, we're so amazing, we've done this thing. It's like, no, specifically because we're not amazing that we've done this thing. This is a normal thing that people can go and do. And we're not going mental. We haven't fallen off a religious cliff and decided that we've done this, that and the other now. It's
yeah,
like,
come on, guys. All we're trying to do is fill our God-shaped hole.
Yeah. But like, it's actually a normal human curiosity, and it's just part of a normal bit of the world that we're entering into at the minute. And yeah, I just think there is a point to talking about it in a casual, but giving it, I say casual, but like talking about the importance of doing it, but not doing it in a kind of, we're holier than thou because we've done it. Because clearly not, and definitely not. And the whole point of doing it is for the normality of it. So those are
all our excuses.
These are all the excuses to why we're just going to talk about ourselves.
Now we're going to talk about our experiences of attending a Buddhist group. But let's go back further, first of all, because I think this is only a question really that you can answer. So how did Buddhism come into our lives? Because it definitely came via you.
A long time ago, and I don't know why, but a very long time ago, probably pre-meeting you, I don't think there was a time pre. I wasn't the same person I am now. But I've always kind of...
Actually, you literally aren't, by the way. Your body is completely...
It changes every 7 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. Anytime I've considered... So, if anyone ever said, are you an atheist? I was always no. Because...
Oh, only
because I was just like, I'm not denying anything, but I'm not interested.
We talked about agnosticism a few episodes ago.
And I think I wouldn't have necessarily even known to call myself that, but I definitely... There was a time when, everyone was like, well, I'm definitely atheist because God doesn't exist. And I was just like, well, I don't think he exists, but I'm not going to deny anything. Like, I'm not that bothered. And I actually would love it if there was more to everything. But... So that reason, I'm not going to call myself atheist. And then if I ever had that conversation with people, we would then be like, well, these sort of religions make sense to me and this sort of thing is interesting. And I always kind of knew that Buddhism was like this religion that wasn't really a religion. It was probably more a philosophy, but never bothered to look into it. And so every now and then, if we were in like charity shops or just faced with the opportunity to find information about Buddhism in a very basic way, then I would be interested in it and maybe I'd buy the odd book. But I was always overwhelmed by it because there is an awful lot of writing in Buddhism, and I'm still getting my head around, what comes first, what is a school of what. I think we're always getting there now, but there's just so much.
I don't think I am. No, by the way. I mean, I think it's quite an important thing to talk about. I think. I mean, when I started thinking generally about religion, one of the problems was that I had no fucking idea. So whatever I would have picked. Yeah. If I read a book by Hare Krishna and I thought, I think I'd love to learn more about Hinduism, and I tried to read about Hinduism and I was just like, right, well, I have no idea about Hinduism. Yeah. And I think culturally that's hard because you're brought up in the West and you're brought up in a Christian country. 100%. So that's the one that sort of makes sense. But
yeah, no, I think totally that. I think all the Eastern religions and philosophies just feel, because they're so much older than what we're used to in the Western world. So there's just so much to go through, and it probably doesn't make sense to a Western Christian kind of background, because it's quite fantastic and wonderful. But so yeah, I just kind of like started buying lots of random books, and and they didn't make sense. Like I thought Zen Buddhism, because I was kind of interested in Japanese authors generally, so I thought, well, maybe Zen Buddhism and the Japanese Zen will be interesting. Tried reading that, and if you've got no Buddhism background, then Zen Buddhism makes zero sense. It's hard to understand anyway.
It's a fun head fuck, I think.
Yeah, so, and purposefully so. So then the next book I got was probably the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which again, if you've got no Buddhism background and then you read this fantastical, just makes absolutely no sense book. So it was a bit of a like janky kind of like way in, but it was just interesting, and I didn't know why it was interesting. I just kind of knew that it was a peaceful thing. A lot of people in celebrity culture or in bands or in who are famous, there was a lot that I knew dabbled or kind of would have considered themselves Buddhist. MCA from the Beastie Boys. Well, MCA from the Beastie Boys was the one that, like, when I was 13, I knew he was Buddhist. And
he's cool. Oh, he's a Buddhist. That's cool.
No, but I just thought...
That was a bit like when Tool wrote something about the Church of Scientology on the inside of their thing. Oh, God, that's wicked.
But that's
going
brilliant.
to be well good. And then I got Dianetics and I thought, fuck me, this is...
I got that wrong. Whereas I think MCA was making a point of being like, actually, like, he was bringing nice things into a culture that absolutely didn't exactly show its
early Beastie Boys was not very Buddhist.
Heck no. Yeah, like one goes off with Kathleen Hanna and learns feminism, and the other is a Buddhist. Anyway, it's really beautiful. But so I just kind of just knew that, like, people who I considered decent thought that was good. And then, and it's just kind of built from then. It just turned into randomly picking up books on Buddhism and not touching them for ages. And then I must say, it was that Art of Life book that you bought me, Thich Hat Hanh.
I don't really know why. I do ultimately why I bought that for you. I mean, it was quite an early just birthday present. And I think I was buying loads of different little things.
Yeah.
And I think I just went into a bookshop and and this is why I'm kind of interested, because I don't know where I got this idea from, but it was probably just because you'd bought a book prior. But I thought to myself, well, she's getting interested in Buddhism, knowing nothing, not really even understanding what that meant fundamentally. And just looked through the little Buddhist shelf in the shop that I now work in, funnily enough, and just picking that one out fairly round. I think I might have known. I think you had one of his other books.
Well, no, I didn't. Oh, right. I didn't know who he was. So when which is mad now because he's probably one of the most prolific authors.
I think I know what I did, and this is awful. Really, I got my phone out and I googled who's a good Buddhist author, and then I picked up the one by the first person who said everything said, Thich Hat Hanh. No, I can't say his name.
I always get it wrong. It's going to be a thing from now on. Yeah. But yeah, and also I think even when you got it for me, it's specifically because it was like Buddhism in general life. Like it was like Buddhism for people that didn't have to know. You didn't have to know anything about Buddhism, and that book doesn't really explain an awful lot about it. It's just that it's the mentality and the ethos and the philosophy, but it's not any of the difficult to understand story of Buddhism from the very beginning. And I just was absolutely fascinated by that book. And it tied together, this is how you can apply the ethos and the philosophy to just life without having to really go there with understanding anything else.
And at the point where you're reading some books about Buddhism, did you ever have it in your head that you would want to sort of, for want of a better word, I think this is the right word actually, but it's going to sound clanky, like do Buddhism, that you would go to a group or that you would...
No, definitely not.
No.
I think that that book specifically, and I remember a lot of it, it was just so apt for getting on in life that it didn't sway me to thinking about Buddhism properly at all. It just made me think, this just makes sense. And what it is actually, it's very clever because that's just philosophy and Buddhist teaching, but it's not, it doesn't feel like you've just read that. You've just read a book by a monk who is just like, this is how you should treat people and this is why.
So it's almost like a self-help sort of book, or you would have read it almost like you might a self-help book.
Almost like it wasn't quite self-help because it wasn't really telling you what to do. It was just saying, it was just suggestion. It was a lot of his life. It was a lot of like, something that I really remember from it is when he's talking about going and working with prisoners in prisons that have done some really horrendous things. And it was just making you think. One of the things he says was, I treat everyone with compassion and with love, because he's just like, you have no idea if you'd have been in their position, in their upbringing, with everything that had happened to them, that you wouldn't have done the same things as them. You can just never say, and you can never know someone's position, so therefore you can never judge. And there's loads of Buddhist teaching behind that, but he was applying it to a really real life situation that we all have. It was a bit like what you were saying earlier with the kind of lowering expectations of other people in that respect, or removing that idea that you have, and being able to connect with people better. I work in a forensic mental health unit with murderers and people who've done some really nasty things. And people say, how do you get on? And it's like, well, I don't know that. I hope I never would. But if I had those upbringings and had those issues, and there's so many, I mean, let's not get into it, but there's so many different things. You just never know what you'd be like, so you can't judge people.
But
and I got that from that book.
But do you think you got that from that book? And I ask this because, having worked as a mental health nurse, admittedly, well, I did bits of forensics here and there, but generally speaking, more on acute wards. But of course, as a result of that, I've worked with people that basically any bad thing that you can think of, I've worked with people that have done it.
Yeah.
And in a way, I've found, maybe it's because I've got some distance from psychiatric nursing now, so I'm kind of at a point where I got a bunch of lessons from it, but I'm not caught up in it anymore.
Yeah.
But I found it the other way around, that experience has left me in a place where I'm more able to understand and accept some, only a few, but some Buddhist teachings of those types.
Yeah.
Like, I think there's a mindset that you have to have as a psychiatric nurse, and you either have it and that's why you're doing the job, or you just have to work out a way to get it, maybe, or I don't know. It's hard to describe. I don't know how. It's obviously different for everybody, but for me, I was not always able to do that, but from an early stage I realized, maybe subconsciously, I was very young when I started, so I don't know that I ever had the wherewithal to fully think about this in any sort of deep way, but I just accepted, someone would come in and so that people would say, oh, he's a pedo or something, and I'd just have to, I'm here to look after them. It would not affect my attitude towards that person at all.
Yeah.
That's not to say I wouldn't be aware of it, and I wouldn't have probably told all my mates, oh, I'm working with the right dodgy pedo at the moment.
But I think so I did always have that mentality and I think mental health nursing forces you to be like that if you're not already, but I think you might be drawn to it and have that subconsciously there, because I think, although I work with an awful lot of people and have worked with an awful lot of people that it isn't
I was going to say, me too. I've had that,
and there's a lot of judgmental
well.
people working in fields where you think you should probably have left that judgment at the door, even if you have it. But I think it was reading this book, it was just the way it quantified it, because I could do that at work. I was very good at doing that at work, and I think I probably could apply it to the rest of my life, and I probably already did. But it was just, again, mental health nursing just puts you in specific places where you are forced to do it all the time, and you do it, and you're really good at it. But it was just about, there was a philosophy and there's a principle and there's a religion that really exemplifies that. And it was something I already understood, so it resonated with me. It explained it even better than I could have ever explained it, which I think is why I really liked it, because I was like, oh my God, I get that. In fact, he's really like summed up what I do naturally, what I work really hard to do at work. And actually it's important to apply that to everything. And I think that's what I really took from that book. Not that I learnt it from him, but just that he just really summed it up in a way that I was like, oh wow, like we should be doing this for everyone all the time, and then applying it to those moments when you're pissed off for a stupid reason at someone that doesn't even know why you're pissed off at them.
I suppose it's maybe to some extent it gives you some almost like backing to do it. I think particularly maybe where, because that's quite a controversial thing possibly for a lot of people to imagine, although I think everyone, if you put it into the context of you being a nurse or being a psychiatric nurse, but to say sort of, I'm comfortable working with people that have murdered people. To some people, that would be kind of outrageous. Yeah. Maybe. And so, in a way, I wonder whether it's like sometimes you just get this from reading stuff anyway. I find if I read a book and it kind of agrees in some way with how I feel naturally, then it almost gives me a sort of confidence in that, whereas maybe I wouldn't have been that confident about it before. True. I mean, a lot of the conversations we've had over the past however many episodes of the podcast, like, I wouldn't have had the confidence to be as honest as I am if it wasn't for the fact that I suddenly realised, oh shit, there's someone who and you always assume that these people are a million times more intelligent and more emotionally, developed than you are. And maybe that's not always true, but It gives you a sort of certain amount of confidence. So to have a religion, a particular religion that's many, thousands and thousands of years old, it gives you, gives you a bit of a boost. Because I found with a lot of Buddhism, and I don't say this because I'm like perfect or anything by any means, but a lot of the opinions that I held when I started reading about Buddhism, and this was very true of Stoicism too, but also has popped up here and there in lots of different philosophies and lots of different areas. It was that there was these things that I've always felt, and I've looked around and I felt like most other people don't feel, maybe. I don't know of a specific example really, but there's been loads of things where I've read it and I've been like, oh shit, that's kind of, that's sort of describing me, or at least my attitude. I'm certainly not saying I'm basically the Buddha guy. I really wasn't. Then I've read these books and now it just turns out, yeah, great, I'm the Buddha. But I'm not saying that at all, but I just mean opinion-wise, it fits into what I naturally felt anyway, I think.
I think it's also, I think when you say, I didn't think everyone always feels like this. I think there is a worth in saying that, because Stoicism and Buddhism are only one of many philosophies and many religions. So there are alternative opinions. So I do think it is worth saying that you stumbled across this thing that seems to resonate with you, because there are many things that wouldn't resonate.
True, although I think there's a lot of religious ideas that resonate with me if you remove the religion from them. I'm sure this is true of everybody. I mean,
and are quite similar to each other.
Well, quite similar to each other. And that sort of fits in with that as well. We talked about this before, like when you start reading about a lot of these ideas, you suddenly realise that most of them are just more or less the same. And fundamentally, they're just good ideas. And so that fits into the fact that I feel like they fit with what I was thinking before, because actually you could describe this in a way of, like Jesus was actually a pretty decent guy. Do you know what I mean? He had pretty good opinions about things, actually. But you can't say, or you can say that, but you can't necessarily jump into that with both feet, because in order to jump in that with both feet, you also have to believe there's an old man in the sky and all of the sort of mystical and magical things.
I guess the other thing that I take from, finding an opinion or someone describing something in a book who's a Buddhist monk, is that these things take practice. So whilst they feel natural, they obviously aren't natural to everyone, and they don't always feel natural to me. And the point that someone who's bringing it up is part of a religious group that is a philosophy that is all about the practice and all about that you might, this actually does take work. There are moments where it feels natural, but there are moments where it doesn't, i.e. road rage, i.e. when you're pissed off at someone else.
No, I mean, most of it.
Exactly that. And there's something that Alain de Botton picks up in his Religion for Atheists, which is about, I think it's when he's talking about the art and the over-the-top art that needs to be everywhere in religious places and what the point of that actually is. And I think he was saying something to the effect of, religion worked out years and years and years ago that people are rubbish at continuously being nice to each other. And we need these humongous reminders that we're fallible and that we actually need to practice really hard being nice to each other, because whilst sometimes we're nice to each other, we're really good at being horrible to each other. And I think that's what I take from that Art of Life book mainly, is all of these really amazing things that feel quite natural to me, and I bring it and it resonates with me, comes from a man who dedicated his life to practicing it. If he was good at it, which he is good at it, you'd think you can just be good at it and get on with life. No, he dedicates his entire life to daily working on himself and working on continuously being able to do that. And noting when it's hard, noting that it's a human condition to not, and therefore the only way we can continue to do it is to make efforts.
Well, that's something that attracts me to it, though, from a completely different perspective. And just to be clear, when I say it resonated with things that I thought before, I did literally mean thinking. So I'm not so I unquestionably don't think that doing. So there's a difference between reading a book about Buddhism and thinking, oh, some of my opinions are included in here. That's great. And
I've already done it.
And doing it. No, actually doing it, because doing it is unquestionably. It's a discipline. I mean, it's fundamentally a discipline, and we will get into sort of the nuts and bolts of that discipline. But I'm sure most people understand that it's it's regular meditation practice. It's it's a certain attitude towards other people. It has a lot of, like you say, there's similarities with sort of Christianity. So if you want to put it in that context, whilst I'm sure most people listening to this would hate Christianity or whatever, or have negative attitudes towards Christianity, fundamentally, being kind to others, not being greedy, not doing the 7 deadly sins and not killing people, is pretty good. I think we can all accept that.
Pretty good.
Well, it depends if they've just not let me cross at the zebra crossing.
The car kicker is out again.
But yeah, the actual doing of it is not easy. But that, to me, that sits with a lot of stuff that I got from the punk scene in the early days. Yeah, do it yourself. I mean, that kind of, who were the people that I was listening to when I was younger? It was people like Henry Rollins. It was people like Ian MacKaye. It was people that were saying, leave all the shit bits of life behind and do something. Make something of yourself. Make yourself better and do something with that. And that requires a lot of discipline. And the thing is that, and where Buddhism shares with that, is that they're all about discipline. It's all about continuously trying to make yourself better. It's all about continuously trying to learn more. And it's interesting that you said like Thich Nhat Hanh is good at this. I'm sure he's dead now, but I'm sure he was, sorry, I just went a bit spooky then. I'm sure he was very good at this, but I don't think you ever crack it. It's not something that certainly all the people that I've read, they don't sort of say, oh, I've done it now. I've become a Buddhist monk and now I'm sorted. It's like it's just one more step on a much bigger journey, and it will never end. And that does sound a bit like Scientology, but they're not trying to get any money out of you. So it's
very the opposite.
It's different in that context. But so I mean, the discipline side of it is something that I really like, because I kind of again sort of had that idea in my head more than actually ever did it. So again, I may have spent most of my youth reading Henry Rollins and saying, I'm going to buckle down and I'm going to do, but I never really did, probably, or I did a bit. But
I think you were quite a disciplined person, but I see what you mean. It's not like not directing it at a cause or a one thing,
or
especially
an aim,
not for very long,
I jumped around a lot.
But so going back to that book, it was still a little while after that before really like anything like picked up. I guess it's just a slow collection of books and just being like vaguely interested in it, but definitely with no like direct intention of applying it anywhere. And I think, to be honest, that only really happened when you ramped up your interest in Buddhism. And I'm trying to remember where you started. Because it's more recent, but it was intense. You got a lot of books all of a sudden.
It does. We seem to be describing our respective personalities as well, I suppose. Because I think, first of all, though, I will answer your question, but I mean, I think, first of all, what I viewed in you wasn't quite that. You've missed out some of it, because there was periods where you started, for example, to meditate quite regularly.
Oh, okay,
and you're generally speaking, I don't think it's unfair to say that when I set my mind to something, nowadays, this is definitely not always been the case, but nowadays, if I set my mind to something, I tend to just do it.
Oh yeah, you're 100% on nothing.
Whereas you're someone who does it pretty intensely for a while, and then it kind of drops off, and then you do it again and stuff. And so I suppose in that context, maybe we both need each other for so many different reasons. But this is one of the very good reasons. Forming. Well, this is one of the very good reasons why we when we put our heads together, it kind of works, because but so I mean, I think I saw you doing that, and I think it's hard for me to say, and I think it's for another time to discuss exactly where I was at when I started looking into Buddhism. And we've sort of touched on this in the podcast, but I think I need to do that on another day.
Yeah.
Because there's something about, for some reason, which I can't really fully explain, found myself getting interested in just the idea of what religion had to offer.
Yeah.
Well, not just religion, but sort of spirituality, just spiritual things. And I think fundamentally, and again, we'll talk about this maybe at more depth another time, but fundamentally it was that I felt that the world was increasingly empty of kind of any meaning and all the stuff that we're trying to talk about on this podcast. And I think that emptiness made me look around and think, well, and I've said this before, I used to get loads of meaning and loads of transcendence out of music, and specifically punk music, and to some extent other forms of art. And I just found that those things weren't really providing that, and that was either because I had changed or they had changed, and that's a much bigger discussion. But so I just started looking around for other things, and probably reading more led to those as well. One of the interesting things I found was when you start reading thought, which is not philosophy, but just thoughts. I mean, and there's definitely an overlap, and some of those things are exactly the same. But because I'm not terribly clever and I'm not terribly good at kind of taking in information, I can't sit down. I'm trying it at the moment and failing miserably. I can't sit down and read a philosophy book and get much out of it. Whereas there's a lot of kind of much easier to read. That's what I would describe as thought. They more or less sort of what you would find in the non-fiction section of the bookshop. That are easier. But when you start reading that sort of stuff, you suddenly start finding religion coming up a lot. And not necessarily because those people are in any way religious. In fact, the vast majority of people in the world, or certainly in the Western world, and certainly of the type of people that are writing books, the vast majority are not religious. But it's just that there's ideas coming out of various religions. And so it was interesting because I just found myself kind of noticing that a little bit more. And so within that exploration, and I've brought this up before, I'd read the Ray Cappo book, and I'd listened to a bit of Ray Cappo, who is, I'm sure people know, but was the singer of Youth of Today and Shelter, and was a Hare Krishna from quite young. And I remember in the 90s when I got into Shelter sort of thinking, this Hare Krishna thing sounds like a bit of fun, but not really understanding what the fuck that means, but just thinking Ray Cappo was cool and thinking, maybe I should wear some robes. That would look cool, wouldn't it? That would freak everyone at school out. But not really getting past that. But I read his book and a few other books that he recommended and various different things. And again, I think Hinduism and maybe specifically Hare Krishna, I think we've said this before, is quite an interesting religion because the idea of it's not one religion. It's basically saying whatever you believe in is great. You just need to believe in something. And so I suppose that kind of put me down, a little bit down of, thinking about sort of this spirituality, and I was reading lots of books about it. And then I stumbled across this guy called Brad Warner, who is a Zen Buddhist monk, but he used to be in a hardcore punk band. And, in a lot of ways, I mean, he was a bit older and not anywhere near as successful from a musical perspective, but, not too dissimilar from Ray Cappo's story. He starts in the punk scene, is in an old hardcore band in the early 80s, and then becomes interested in Buddhism, and then eventually finds himself, I won't tell his entire story, but finds himself as a Buddhist monk. And he's into Zen, and he wrote a book called Hardcore Zen, which I was vaguely aware of. And it's more or less his story of that. So a lot of it's just about punk. It's not really about, in the same way Ray Cappo's is, loads of his is just about the New York hardcore scene in the 80s and stuff. So that's already got my interest. And so I read this guy's book, and a lot of it's just his story, but there is quite a lot of, it's been a while since I read it, so I can't really remember exactly what's in there from a Buddhist perspective, but there was a lot of thought in there as well, and lots of different things and why he was attracted to it and stuff. And so I think it just put it in my context. It put it in context for me. Well,
it makes it's an incredibly relatable story to your own experience, and then you think, it's not that weird, this weird, Buddhism floating around in the background as it has been. Actually, someone who was looking for meaning, I'm assuming, I don't know his story, but someone who at least came from the same musical place as I did, and sounds like he is a similar kind of, liked an interest in thoughts and
he
thinking.
Really likes Godzilla films. We're not the same there.
Yeah, all right, he's a nerd, and you're not a nerd. You're a nerd in different ways. But yeah, so then all of a sudden you're like, exactly that. It puts it in context. You think, actually, this is something that is accessible to me. So again, it's going back to the reason that we're talking about it now. It's like, oh wow, this is kind of a normal dude, liked my stuff, liked the same sort of things as me, kind of like normal guy, not a little bit older than me, and then he found his way there. So maybe it's not so strange to find your way there.
And then also, I think, but whilst doing that, and this almost sounds like it's indoctrination, but I mean, Buddhism is, they're not interested in recruiting you, trust me. But it's almost like, it was like that story that you're kind of interested in reading anyway, but within that, a bunch of other things that you sort of think, I kind of think like that. I kind of think like that. And so really, I read that book, and then I bought all of his other books, because again, as we've established, David doesn't do things in halves, he goes full in, and I've read them all, pretty much one after the other. And most of the other ones are like hard Buddhism. There's bits where he sometimes uses his life as, to kind of discuss some of the ideas in there, but there's some of them are just real hard Buddhism. But one of them, which is great, which is called Letters to a Dead Friend About Zen. And it's literally written in the forms of letters. It is what it sounds like it is. One of his friends died, and the idea of the book is he really regretted the fact that he never told his friend about this thing that he was doing. And he thinks that the friend would have been completely uninterested in it because, like all punks or most punks, he's completely against religion and he would have been totally turned off by it. But he thinks that Zen Buddhism had a lot to offer him in lots of ways, and it's really lovely written because it's like letters, and it's really simple, and it just explains everything in a quite a superficial way. I mean, it doesn't get into but it's just the sort of the general feel of what it is to be interested in Zen Buddhism. I just found that really, again, probably because it was easy to read, and I'm not very bright, it just allowed me to kind of get a real feel of it, and it was at that point, which is going back to what we were talking about earlier, it was at that point where I started to think loads of these things is just sort of what I think anyway. But and it's amazing to find this place where I think everybody sort of thinks this way. So that's kind of how I got into it, and then got interested in it, and then obviously we started talking about it, and various other things happened, but and I think so. Going to we're really gonna have to finish soon. So we've not done the thing we're going to talk about, but we will continue this conversation without question. But one of the things that I felt like, and this came from Alan de Botton's book, Religion for Atheists, definitely, and to some extent his School of Life book as well. One of the things I felt like I was really missing out on was a kind of ritual. We've talked about ritual before, and some sort of that kind of like practice, like community and ritualistic practice, which I think really is really lacking from our lives. And I've said this before, but I think I've used to feel that from the punk scene. I used to kind of feel that definitely the community, and that's still the case. But I think also ritual felt like whilst we didn't ever acknowledge it. There was, unquestionably, we all engage in various rituals at gigs and in lots of different ways, really. But I felt like I'd sort of lost something there, and I was looking for that. And so I think the idea then, eventually, when we eventually talked about actually joining a Buddhist group and going and doing things, that side of things really attracted me, which has been quite interesting because the nature of the Buddhist group, and we will continue this on the next episode more than anything, but just to give you a vague idea, it's once a week, and you do a long meditation at the beginning, and we will talk about meditation more as well in the future. And then there's kind of a teaching type of thing. But also interdispersed with this, there's some chanting. There's some call and response stuff. Most of it's in another language. I've got no idea whatsoever, for the most part, what it is I'm saying. And it probably would, to most people, it would look like sort of quite an unusual thing, but I feel like I've got an awful lot out of it, and it's quite interesting because the people in this group, we went for a while, and then we missed a couple because we were away and what have you, and it happened that the group before we were going away, they really got into some weird shit. I think it's fair to say.
They told the story of a Buddha, of a Bodhisattva.
Yeah.
Who knows? We're making these words up potentially.
I think that's the right word, but I might be wrong. Sorry, Buddhist.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, this is where we're at.
We're really, really not there. But yeah, it was a fantastical story. I know they're called Avalokitesvara, and we should definitely. I want to talk about that being at some point.
The being
but anyway,
of 1,000 arms.
It's got this being has 1,000 arms, and they were talking about the story in a very like real way,
in a similar way to how you might expect Christians to talk about, angels or something.
Exactly. Or any of the Bible.
But we were at this thing together, and they talked about this thing, and on the walk home we had this lovely conversation. It's really nice because it's about 40 minutes from our house walk, so we've always walked along the seafront home, and we have these conversations about what we've just experienced. And again, we'll share some of them with you as time goes on. But that one was really lovely because we were talking about the metaphor behind the thing and all this sort of stuff, and we just got loads out of it, which again maybe we'll have to get into when we on the next episode. But they thought, we've scared them off. These two nice people I say nice. These two people have turned up, and they've come quite regularly, and they seem quite keen. And then we told them about the 1,000-armed deity. Yeah.
And now they think we're all crazy.
Now they think we're crazy, and they're not going to come back. And it was funny because when we did come back, that's what they were saying to us. They were, I'm really sorry, we thought we'd scared you off.
We were like, no, that was our favourite session. We just haven't been able to be back.
But I suppose in that context, it makes me think that that's their experience a little bit, and I can kind of. It's funny, the things that what I'm trying to say, I suppose, is the things that I'm quite attracted to, which is the cosmic weird shit. Yeah. I mean, I love the meditation. I love it all, really. Yeah. But the real cosmic weird shit, which I am getting a surprising amount out of. I can imagine would put off a lot of people, but you kind of, I think, you have to go into it with a very metaphorical eye, and they certainly 100%. Do. And that's
but it's not obvious because they're not saying, of course we don't believe this. No. Like no one says that while you're talking about it. While you're talking about it, you get the full amount out of it through just speaking the metaphor, speaking the stories as truth.
But that's one of the beauties of it, and this is nor does a poet, right? Yeah. This is the thing, we're so used to. Particularly, as time goes on, I think that it gets worse and worse and worse in the sort of, the modern way of looking at things is that if something isn't absolutely explained to you, then you can't handle it.
We're all like cynical realists as well, so we're just like, that's what people scream. That's the atheist argument all the time is, this couldn't possibly be true. Yeah, it's like, well, you're missing everything. You're potentially missing a lot of other things by just being negative, like just. What's the point in being right? Just go with it. And I think that's what we're doing. We're like, I mean, I don't know about you, and this is a conversation for another day as well, but I'm not going to say that I'm a Buddhist.
We were asked the other day by someone, just in polite conversation. I mean, this is the sort of weird shit that we experience now. I mean, I could never imagine this happening at any other time in my life. We were just strolling home from a meditation session with someone who we don't really know, and she just said, "So are you guys Buddhists?" Like it's like and we both sort of looked at each other like, "Well, I don't know."
We haven't really had that conversation.
And it's quite an interesting thing because I can't ever imagine calling myself an anything. Yeah. But then equally, there was something quite nice about it. There was something quite sort of, oh wow, this person who we don't really know thinks that we might be this thing that I don't really know what it is, but I think I like. And I don't know, I can't really explain that feeling.
It is interesting, isn't it? Because it feels like going the whole hog and saying a thing. Because also, I just feel like I'm still Buddhist curious. But the beauty how
of it
nice
is
to be
is
considered
that
a thing.
The people, we've been going to this Buddhist group for a while. It's not like they want us to be Buddhist or they want us to be anything.
They're not bothered if we are.
I went to was it the last? I think the last one or one of the last ones. I went on my own, and there was this lovely thing where they did a sort of call and response thing, which was in English, and it had been written by just a person, like one of the older people in this group, I suppose, the Triratna Buddhist order. I don't think it's an order. I don't know. Group. I don't know. And there was elements in it which talked about kind of. It didn't use the word sin, but there was kind of an element to this thing which talked about confession. It used the word, I think, confession, and it used a few other words that were, and it could be taken in a lot of ways. It was a very sort of poetic thing that we were all saying. And of course, me, the only version of religion I've ever experienced in a very superficial way and as a very small child was like Christianity. It was kind of like you say the Lord's Prayer, then you finish the Lord's Prayer, then you leave, and no one talk about the Lord's Prayer. So we did this thing, and then at the end of it, everyone said, I hated that. I don't do confession. You know, that made me feel like I was in Catholic school. And they had this really open conversation about this thing, which was the ritual that we did in the equivalent of a church. I mean, it's totally not a church, but you know, like the equivalent, but the equivalent thing of what it would be like to go to a church every week. But just for Buddhists. And, you know, I'm sitting there just sort of like, I just said what I was told. Yeah. Because that's my understanding of what religion is. I didn't know I could question this stuff. I didn't know I could just say, I didn't like that. This is why I didn't like it. And these are the bits I didn't like. I didn't mind this bit, but I'm not, I refused to say that bit. I was like, what? Is this how religion works? I thought we just had to say what we were told to say.
Blaspheming.
Yeah. And that's a real beauty, I think, of Buddhism. There's none of the things that I can think of that people would have against religion exist here. Yeah. You know, you're not expected to do anything. They're definitely, like I say, they're definitely not trying to recruit you.
And it's so not dogmatic, and they're so more interested in the human experience. Well, I say human experience, but like you're the
1,000-arm human.
Yeah,
experience.
But like the experience that you are having and that the group are having, and nothing's wrong. Like, it's just, let's explore, let's have a think, let's, you know, it's just not what you expect from religion, which in my mind, because we're Western and Christianity is the main one, is just so dogmatic. And Buddhism has all these stories and has all this history. A lot of it, you know, is real, and a lot of it is, here's a story, or doesn't matter if it's true or not. You get a lesson out of it, but it's all there for the exploring and not to be taken literally, or to be I don't know, penalised if you don't understand it, or penalised if you think different.
I think the whole concept of being penalised just doesn't exist.
Yeah,
and I'm not saying it. I'm not sort of laying any kind of hard rap on Christianity or any other.
No. And also,
this is our religion. But
this is our experience of that religion. We don't actually, we're not Christian. We haven't, you know, like you say, we've only had a very brief understanding of it. Yeah,
and my understanding of the Triratna type of Buddhism is that it is sort of fairly westernized anyway. So I mean, it's basically a guy who became a Buddhist monk in Tibet after doing that for 15-20 years or something in the 50s and 60s, came back to the UK and started this order. And so it's very much through Western eyes, and I'm sure that could be criticised. I don't think generally it is particularly, but I mean, I could see why it would be. But in that context, it's quite palatable for us, probably, in ways that we don't really understand. But in ways that I can say with some certainty, Zen Buddhism is not very palatable. Deliberately so, I suppose. But also just in general, like this has a degree. There's some overlaps in the sort of way that it's run with probably a fairly middle of the road Christian church, I would think, just to an extent. I mean, they're completely different, and I've probably got that wrong in some ways, but it's palatable to us as two people who, whilst not being in any way religious prior, our only experience of religion is Western Christianity at school.
It's in a way that seems to be easier to understand, easier to get involved with, and it doesn't feel like nothing's forced and nothing's... it feels like we're allowed to say, if this is what we're going to say, because I really don't know how I feel, but if we were to be like, oh, we're not Buddhist, we're just interested, I'd be like, sweet. I'm glad you're here. Like, that's the whole point. And we're not going to treat you like you're stupid, and we're not going to dumb anything down, and we're not going to make allowances for you. You're in it, like, you've come, so here's the chanting and here's the teaching, but there's no like requirement to then confirm that you are Buddhist and sign up here and do that. It's just so come and go, and it's really good for people like us who are at the beginning of seeing what it's all about.
Possibly a journey, or possibly not.
Yeah, who knows?
But there is one other interesting thing about that, which I think it does well, which is almost the opposite of that, which is that, of course, so meditation and mindfulness, and we've talked about this before, have obviously been completely brought into the mainstream in the West and are being used in a certain way, which is
the self-help world.
Which is, you know, I want my life to be better, I want to be more successful, so I'm going to use mindfulness and meditation to do those things. And I don't think anyone would say that there's anything wrong with that specifically. I don't know obviously I'm sure different Buddhists have different attitudes towards that, but the interesting thing about this is that there's no element of that. It's made very clear to you that fundamentally what you're trying to do is, yes, improve yourself, but improve yourself in order to make the world around you better.
Yeah,
it's not a selfish. It's not it is a self-help movement, I suppose, in the sort of strictest sense, but it's not.
I mean, without getting too into it, the whole point is to realise, oh God, there's so many different points, so I'm going to absolutely mash this. But it is working on yourself to realise that you are no different and you are all interconnected with so many other things. And so if you're working on yourself, you're helping the world and you're helping other people.
Yeah.
Through literally being a better person and being nicer to other people, but also you can go really cosmic, you can go metaphysical, you can go a really like mad way on that.
You don't exist.
That you don't exist.
Just to be clear, everybody. I don't know if you think that you do exist. I'm sorry if I'm the one to tell you this, but you don't exist.
I think we've already said you don't exist before.
Have.
But yeah, so it's kind of yeah, a critique of Buddhism is it's very individualistic and it can look like a self-serving, self-help thing.
But it isn't, though.
But it isn't.
So it's used outside of Buddhism. Buddhist ideas are used for that purpose.
And also, just to, a true bastardization is mindfulness is one of the Eightfold Path. So it's just like mindfulness is, you can't have mindfulness on its own. One of the things that the group talks about a lot is like, it's all well and good that we do mindfulness and meditation, but that's one of 8 things.
Yeah.
You got to do the other things as well. And the fact that one got removed and used in the self-help movement, some people have found their way to Buddhism that way, and mindfulness is brilliant for so many other things. But I think, it's good to put it back in its place and learn it properly, and not as a self-help thing, but within the other parts of it. It's to reach out further and realise that you are nothing, and
and of course, in that context, that then helps with everything that we're talking about. So then that definitely helps with community.
Yeah.
I think it helps with a certain sense of awe at the world, which is again probably a subject that we need to pick up again.
Yeah.
And a certain level of transcendence, which isn't the sort of transcendence that maybe you think of when you think of religion, which is some crazy person speaking in tongues because they've got the Jesus Christ in them or something. But there's a certain transcendence in within meditation, unquestionably, or there can be.
Especially in a group. We will definitely have to talk about the group much more, but like that being in a group doing this thing that you consider quite individual because eyes shut, doing your own thing. Something about doing it in a group, in a room with other people. Again, let's talk about the group much more in the next time we talk.
There is something. I think I've used the word cosmic too much. There's something. It's probably just psychological transference, if you want to put it into more sort of scientific words. But there is something unquestionably different about the energy. Maybe I don't like that word at all, but I can't think of any other way of describing it.
David, get your tie-dye bandana out.
Oh,
he's a hippie boy.
I would have been in the Weatherman. I wouldn't have been. I would have been blowing people up.
I know you would.
I'd have been kicking cars that didn't let me cross the road. But yeah, so I think we're going to have to call it a day there. That's quite a good point to call it a day. So next time we're going to pick up on exactly what it's been like to attend this
100%.
This meeting and what we've got out of it, and hopefully that might be of some vague interest to you.
Yeah.
So if it is, then please listen again in 2 weeks' time.
Yeah.
We have been Sohbet Punx.
We have been.
You have been the listener.
You have been. We don't exist, and neither do you.
None of us exist, but an email certainly doesn't exist. I mean, the internet doesn't exist, but you can email us if you'd like at shamcityroasters@gmail.com. And we will do another one in 2 weeks' time, and we will see you then.
Yeah, ciao, ciao. Thank you very much.
Goodbye.
Mwah.